Hi, and welcome to the Productive Pessimist Wipeout Wednesday, where we'll be exploring the difference between systemic barriers and personal challenges in relation to disability. Um, Obviously, if you have any engagement with the Department for Work and Pensions, Job Centre Plus, any of their employability sector partners, you will be told that there are no systemic barriers. There are only personal challenges, and it is your responsibility to to deal with those challenges, because the state can't just be supporting people who can't cope with a little bit of challenge in their life. Um, and that's true. There will be things that are just personal challenges. They can feel very much like barriers, and they can feel very difficult to deal with, and you can be a bit unsure as to how you're even going to begin to think about dealing with them. But they are still just personal challenges. And I had a friend who, I was 17, he was in his early 20s at the time, and he said you get 15 minutes. You get 5 minutes to cry about it, 5 minutes to be angry about it, 5 minutes to feel hopeless about it, but within 15 minutes you need to figure out what you're going to do about it. And for over 20 years I've remembered that, because it's actually really good and really practical advice. Because you'll be told by the corporate resilience training, um, and the stuff you get sent online if you're out of work for too long by the government, that resilience means that you never have feelings about anything. You just get on and crack on and push through it, and that's not actually the case. You're human. You're going to have feelings. You're going to feel that things are unfair, and yeah, absolutely, you don't have a contract with life where life promised that it would be fair. But it is frustrating when the unfairness seems to affect the same groups of people all the time. That every time there's a barrier, it's a barrier against the same groups of people. And that can feel frustrating. It absolutely is unfair. And the fact that unfairness is part of life doesn't mean we can't have feelings about unfairness when we experience it, especially if we're impacted by it. Um, and sometimes when things aren't fair and we raise the fact that they're not fair, people who are in a position to do something about the way the system works go, oh, actually, yeah, you're right. I should be doing something about that. I hadn't realized that that was happening, or I hadn't realized it was having that much of an impact. And, for able-bodied people, it's very easy for them to see things like the Paralympics, to see visibly disabled people in Parliament, in professional jobs, to see all of the talk about accessibility accommodations, to see wheelchair ramps everywhere they go. In the UK, particularly, that's a very common thing, because it's a mandatory part of um, public life, is that you have to have accessibility inclusion, and for able-bodied people to see all of that and go, well, therefore the barriers have been removed. There's a blind MP in Parliament. There are wheelchair ramps. The buses have floors that go down, that can be lowered down, and there's ramps, and there's a dedicated space for your wheelchair. Um, it's a separate video on what you do when some mother with her pushchair won't move out of the dedicated space for the wheelchair, but I'm not going to derail on that. Yeah, there's dedicated space for your wheelchair. You can get hearing aids, and there's hearing loops in buildings, and this and this and this, and we're hearing about mental health and neurodiversity literally all the time. And there's this chunk of money that the government can give to companies to help disabled people be able to do their jobs better. It's not actually to do your job better, by the way. It's supporting people with disabilities to do a job they are already more than skilled and capable at doing exceptionally well, but because of systemic barriers related to their disability, they need support in order to actually do the job. They are entirely capable of doing it on a cognitive level and a level of skill and knowledge. It's just there are actual barriers that are not personal challenges, they are systemic barriers. So it's not there to help disabled people do their jobs better, it's to help them actually do jobs that they are capable and skilled for at all. Because if access to work didn't exist, if accommodations didn't exist, there would be so much potential, so much competency, so many skills that were just permanently unable to be part of the workforce. And, the government likes to complain about how much access to work costs. It will cost a lot more to not have it. In the same way as they are going to find it's going to cost a lot more to not have personal independence payment, which is, for many people, alleviating systemic barriers to their inclusion in the workplace. And that's going to be a future problem. And unfortunately, the future government is going to make it the future society's problem, because they always do. But anyway, so, it's easy as an able-bodied person, as a mentally well person, to see all of this and go, but there aren't any barriers. We've brought all this stuff in at considerable expense to the taxpayer. Me, personally, with my taxes that I resent paying, have brought all this stuff in. And so the barriers don't exist anymore. The barriers do. My major disability, I have several disabling health conditions. The main one that brings a lot of barriers is that I'm registered blind. That means that I'm also banned from driving. For quite obvious reasons. I genuinely accept that I would not be remotely safe to be driving, even with, one of these self-driving cars. You still have to have some level of ability to see and process quickly what's going on so that you can correct the self-driving car if it's about to make a mistake, because you're still liable for what that car does. So the systemic barriers that come with my sight loss are that I'm not able to drive. The UK isn't, in terms of daily life, as car dependent as many other countries are. The US, for example, the United States of America, is very, very car dependent in many areas, and it would be actually impossible to live any kind of life being banned from driving in parts of America. The UK, and certainly where I live, that's not the case. But the assumption that people will have a car, will be able to drive, is actually creating a systemic barrier to employment. Literally, only about 25% of the jobs that are advertised don't explicitly state that you have to have a driving license and access to a car. 25%. And then break that down, there's usually only about half of that 25%, so 12.5% of jobs that I actually have the skills, competency, and experience to do. I can upskill, I can reskill, but that takes time, and understandably, companies want someone who is already able to do what the job demands. They don't want someone who is going to go, well, yeah, why don't you pay me? For the first 18 months, I'll study on my own time so that I'm eventually able to do the job that you're paying me for already. They don't want that. And I can't afford to live on no money, especially if I'm expected to be engaging with employment, which comes with its own set of costs, which that's another video again. And then There are reasons tied to both the fact that I have disabilities beyond being blind, and the fact that I'm also a supportive carer for my wife, and that means that there are needs for me to be physically in the same space as her for care reasons. That it would be necessary, far more manageable for me to work exclusively remotely, so to work fully from home. Only 12% of the jobs in the UK are fully remote, and that's declining year on year. So I've already only got 12.5% of jobs that I can actually apply to, because there's only around 12.5% that of the 25, there's only 25% of jobs that don't insist that you have, at the very least, a driving license, and usually a driving license and access to your own transport. I'm not even allowed to hold a driving license because of the extent of my sight loss. So of that 25%, I have the background experience and qualifications for roughly half of them. It's 12.5%. But only 12% of jobs in the UK are fully remote. Now, fortunately, most of the fully remote jobs happen to be in an area, at least one area, that I have skills and experience in. But not all of them. So I would say of the 12% that are advertised, probably about 7 to 8% overlap with my skills and experience. So I'm down to 7%, 7 to 8% of jobs. That's all I can apply to, purely because of one of my disabilities, which is being blind, and the systemic barriers that causes of not being able to drive, which then hits the further systemic barrier of a presumption of access to private transport. That then, of course, causes financial struggle. Life is expensive. The cost of living is outpacing wages, never mind welfare support. And we're going to see welfare support reduced even further while the cost of living is still rising. And that's terrifying. I identify that as partly a systemic barrier, because really we shouldn't ever be in a position where the cost of living is outpacing wages. Essentially, welfare should be equivalent to full-time minimum wage. Full-time minimum wage should be higher than it is, and wages should increase to genuinely outpace rises in cost of living. Outpace, not meet. So if the cost of living has gone up by 3%, then your real terms wages need to go up by 5% minimum. Real-time welfare payments need to go up by 4% minimum. So there's still that incentive for people who can work to access work. There is still the fact that people who are genuinely not able to work or not able to engage with the work that is available, which is usually more so the case than, oh, I can't do anything. There are disabled people who their disabilities are so impactful that they can't do any form of work. But the majority of disabled people, it is simply they can't engage with the work that is available in the form that work is available. That's another video. That may be next week's Wipeout Wednesday video, is exploring that more fully. And so, the people who can't engage with work as is available, or can't engage with work at all, are still able to have a decent standard of living. Because not being able to engage with the work that's available, or not being able to engage with any work, is not a fault that someone is guilty of and they should be punished for. We are people in the world, and we are doing our best. And yes, there should be an incentive for people who are able to engage with any work to actually pursue that work. So you should be better off in work, but you shouldn't be in poverty if you can't work, or if work isn't available, or work that you can engage with isn't available. And by engage with, I don't mean are interested by, I mean can get to, can physically do, doesn't compromise your ability to be present for someone you have care responsibilities for. So that financial struggle is definitely significantly a systemic barrier because it has been created by society. The types of jobs that are available are governed in large part by government policy. We are told that they're governed by the market. They're not. Government policy and whom the government is willing to give tax breaks to, what the government's attitude to certain styles of working is, what their priorities for development are, will determine what kinds of jobs are available and what means of engaging with employment are available. I do also include an element of personal challenge to financial struggle because everybody should be, on at least a weekly basis, looking at the money they've spent and going, have I spent this wisely? Am I outspending my means? And in what ways am I doing that? If I were to lose the income that I have, how far could I cut back while still maintaining necessary life? Everybody should be doing that. Even if you're in the 100 grand a year job, you should be doing that regularly because nothing is promised, nothing is guaranteed. You could lose that 100 grand job tomorrow. And trust me, when you sign on to Universal Credit, they're not going to go, oh, you were making 100 grand before. Well, we can't match that, but have 80 grand. You're going to get less than £1,000 a month. And you're going to have to live on that. So have fun. So yeah, I consider financial struggle to be 80% systemic barrier, 20% personal challenge. On actual personal challenges that are not systemic barriers, those are that I am losing the ability to engage with a lot of my hobbies. That's really stressful, it's really frustrating, it's really upsetting. But society hasn't done that to me. That's an unfortunate, inevitable impact of my disability given the hobbies and interests I have. So that's on me to find either accessible hobbies or more accessible ways of engaging with the hobbies I already had. That's a personal challenge situation. Another personal challenge is that because of my sight loss, I'm increasingly feeling very anxious about being outside, about going outside my home. Again, there are systemic barriers around public access for disabled people, but for me, primarily, it's a personal challenge issue of I need to confront that anxiety. I need to work on that anxiety. I can't just go, oh, I'm anxious. I'm anxious, so I can't go out. I can't go out outside because of my anxiety. I have to recognize when the anxiety is genuinely overwhelming and I need to just go, actually, I can just find a way around going outside. I don't need to. There's another way to accomplish what I intended to accomplish by going outside. But equally, to recognize when I'm just feeling normatively anxious and I can just go outside and be anxious outside. I can just go, well, you know what? I'm going to be outside for as short a time as I possibly can. I'm going to make sure that being outside includes some enjoyable aspects of being outside. And then I'm going to come home. And once I'm home, I never have to go outside again today. So that's a personal challenge. And it's a significant challenge. And in part, there are elements of systemic barriers that inform the challenge. The fact, for example, that a lot of the outside is very, very crowded. There isn't really a lot of safety from vehicles where I am, even pedestrianised areas. Vehicles are given permission to drive through pedestrianised areas to park outside places of employment, which makes things very dangerous. There's a lot of people who are dealing with their own challenges. They're not the most stable people, and that's a risk because I can't easily identify from a distance that there is someone who is behaving in a somewhat unstable and disorganized way, and therefore I might want to go a different way so that I avoid coming across that person's path. I'm not saying those are bad people or they shouldn't be out in public. They probably have a lot of systemic barriers around a lack of support. But if I'm feeling unsafe, it's on me to make myself as safe as I can. And obviously the systemic barriers of those people who are not entirely stable, not being supported, complicates things with my sight loss, because I can't always see that potential risk up ahead. I can't always see a way quickly enough that I can avoid encountering that person. So, roughly equally, it's systemic barriers and personal challenges. As I said at the beginning of this video, resilience is how we address personal challenges. It's about looking at a personal challenge, something that is purely a personal challenge, and going, okay, I've been presented with a problem. How am I going to solve it? And part of the way I engage with problem solving is I worst case scenario it. And I actually find that's often quite reassuring. Even when I have broken several therapists by my worst case scenario is that I end up homeless and dying in a ditch. But the only really negative thing about that is the awareness of the homelessness and the process of dying. Once I'm dead, it's not a problem because I don't know about anything anymore. So it's just the process of getting to being dead. But you can worst case scenario it, and then you can go, well, okay, what's the likelihood of each of these worst case scenarios? What are the steps that are available to stop this worst case scenario happening? And when you do that, you actually look and you see that you've got quite a lot of steps. Sometimes you go to access the steps and you find out that they've rotted through, or that they have actually broken completely and no one to bother to repair or replace them. And then you have to go back and do the whole thing again. But systemic barriers are real. They are real, but they're not the only thing. So the ideal thing, especially if you're having to engage with the DWP or Job Centre Plus or employability services, is to actually preemptively identify what are the systemic barriers you're facing and what are the personal challenges you're facing. And then go into, what am I going to do about the personal challenges? Because you can then take that in and go, okay, I've done my part. Your part is to signpost me to support with the systemic barriers. Thank you for joining us today on Wipeout Wednesday, and I look forward to seeing you all here again soon. Thank you.